Hello and welcome to Escape with me, Simon Calder. This is the podcast that takes you north, south, east and west. And I'm joined once again by the adventure guide and photographer, Paul Goldstein. Hello, Paul.
Hey, afternoon, Simon.
Now, coming up, Paul will be conducting a masterclass, he says, on polar tourism, and I'll be speculating about standing by at the southern tip of Argentina for a cut-price Antarctic voyage. If you prefer a city break and to be surrounded by antiquity, then Athens is surely the place to be, and I'll bring you the best of the city in our 48-hour slot. Everest Base Camp is our destination of the week, and sadly I have to bring you the latest on aviation in Russia after yet another fatal incident. But our talking point today, which is where we like to start, is the best place to see wildlife. Now, Paul is something of an old hand at this. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, on every count, actually.
Wildlife, of course, very wild and wide term. So, land or sea, first of all?
I think it would be land, it's just easier for more people to see wildlife on land, and people always have, wildlife, it's an exotic thing. No, probably the best bird spectacle I've ever seen was in Minsmere in Suffolk, about 40,000 starlings murmurating for half an hour. The previous day they'd been doing it over the Sizewell B nuclear plant, which wouldn't have been great. Here it was a perfect clear February half-term evening. It was spectacular. A couple of peregrine falcons got in amongst them. It was mayhem. So you got homework, and research is absolutely key with wildlife. Anyway, wherever you're going, whatever budget, what it is, you've really got to do your work before.
Well, or you sign up with a trip with somebody who considers himself an expert guide, and you just follow them.
I wouldn't know where you find one of them. It's true, but a lot of people don't have the luxury of budget. They can't. So that's not. I mean, I see any number of extraordinary photographs from this country, but if it's just pure numbers, if it's the numbers game, which for some it is, because the greater the number, generally the greater the spectacle. I would say, 6 million king penguins in South Georgia, or about 1.5 million wildebeest and zebras in Serengeti, Maasai Mara, Kenya. Those would be pretty high on the list. And people say, but the elk migration is big. Yeah, but you're going to need about 2 months to even have the slightest chance of bumping into them there. It's such a vast area.
So if I were to say north or south or central, which would you would you recommend? I mean, it sounds to me as though you're saying Suffolk is
No, I'm saying, one shouldn't be completely seduced by the more exotic things, exotic areas which come with a bigger bill as well. But the greatest spectacles would be Antarctica. Or a lot of people just do it by species. They decide, this is the species I want to see. Say a polar bear, where's the best place to see them? And I would say straight away Spitsbergen or Baffin Island in winter.
But not Suffolk?
Not yet. I think we'd have to have a lot of global freezing to change that.
Okay, what do you think about locations, though, such as Etosha National Park in Namibia or the Ngorongoro Crater, where it does seem to be a bit of a zoo?
I think the Ngorongoro Crater as a phenomenon it's extraordinary. There's sort of 600-meter drop into this caldera, and it's very fertile. It has high animal numbers, but not good legislation, stupid petty rules. You can't drive off-road, which is always the question you should always ask. The question, can you drive off-road? Because it's no good, look, there's an elephant there, but it's barely in the same postal district. It's hopeless. So I go back to research. And it can resemble a zoo. There can be just too many vehicles. And there's much better alternatives. Etosha can as well. It's difficult, though. Etosha is part of a desert country in Namibia. And for me, I've been much further north in Namibia, where the desert is the most spectacular in the world. And you gauge it a little differently. Any animal's a bonus. And I would far rather see, rather than at a lit waterhole with fencing around it, see 16 giraffes and a couple of rhino, I'd far rather be on my own on foot, way up in the desert, and just see one in amongst the dunes and rocks. I think it's a completely different context and much more exciting, particularly when you've had to work for it a bit.
And isn't anything to do with wildlife by nature going to be a little bit dangerous, a little bit risky?
No. It's the most common question I've had for 25 years, barely a day. Have you ever had a situation? No, I haven't. Once in Nepal, I had to, I don't really think there was any need, but we did climb up a tree because the wind changed about 90 degrees at the snap of a finger, and there was a couple of rhino around, and they picked up a wind. We were up a tree. It really wasn't dangerous in the slightest. But no, because almost always if there's a situation, if someone gets affected, gets injured, it's because they've done something stupid. None of the animals, buffalo and elephant are probably the most dangerous animals, apart from mosquitoes, cause more deaths, obviously. But they have to be seriously provoked.
Okay. Is the obvious and easy answer for any wildlife in Africa, isn't it just going to be South Africa? Because things seem to be well organised. They seem to have everything under control. There's not even any malaria there.
No,
Okay.
That's wrong on several levels.
Okay.
If you took a square kilometre of the Kruger, it was very easy to do it because you just mark it out on the tarmac, and then took a square kilometre of a Kenyan conservancy, a Maasai Mara conservancy. There's out of season, there's 11 times more animals in Kenya, number one. Number two, you've got off-road driving. Number three, there's no malaria in the Maasai Mara. Sorry, doctors, there just isn't. All right, as you keep giving out those, make sure you take them 4 weeks after as well, the malaria tablets. Ka-ching, drugs companies. Imagine if malaria was a Western illness. I think there might be a cure by now.
If you are listening to this, whether or not you run a drug company or you're indeed a doctor, all I would say is that if you are travelling to sub-Saharan Africa, always worth checking with a health professional before you go there.
There's the key, a health professional, not some parochial doctor who's never travelled there and just looks at this broad-scale map. Look, it's 1,500 metres up in the Serengeti or Mara. There's no malaria at that altitude. But most importantly, there's just more animals there, and it's easier and shorter to get to. You fly to Johannesburg, it's a long old drive. Here, you can fly to Nairobi, a 40-minute scheduled flight, you're straight in. So, yeah, I've been to Kruger many times. I do like it. Doesn't compare.
Well, we'll be hearing more from Paul later on, which you may or may not regard as a good thing, but time now for our city break slot. I've been so lucky to have recently, just now, spent 48 hours in Athens. Terrific to be back in the Greek capital, which is full of life. Very, very busy this summer. Of course, you can fly there. Multiple airlines. EasyJet, I think, has the most departures from Gatwick, Manchester, Luton, and so on. British Airways from Heathrow, of course. Ryanair from Stansted. And Wizz Air have started flying there from Luton. So it's very much on the map. Price is quite high. I've been looking at £200 one way, which is a little bit more than I'd like to pay. So maybe if you wait till September, things will have quietened down a little bit. I stayed at a new property in both senses. I hadn't stayed there before. It's the Athensotel in the Monastiraki district, or Siri, which is basically very close to the Acropolis, but slightly in the city centre as well. Great location, slightly overpriced, I felt, but that was only because other people who checked into the hotel paid about half what I did by waiting until the last minute. You can never quite tell. And that's what I would certainly do next time. Shopping, people like to do that. But the good thing is that the Athens Municipal Market is about a 5-minute walk away from the hotel, and it's absolutely spectacular. A real festival for the ears, the eyes, the stomach, and so on. Talking of the stomach, 2 outstanding locations for the restaurants. As always, take local advice. The Lithos Tavern, very much in the centre of the city, and it is delicious for just that, all the Greek staples. So a very straightforward kebab and souvlaki, and of course the Greek salad. And then I really like the Cafe Melina in Plaka, halfway down the hill from the Acropolis, named for Melina Mercouri, the 20th century Greek actress. While you are looking for your site, well, everybody goes to the Acropolis. Some of them start as early as 8 o'clock in the morning, but almost everybody is down by tea time, 6 o'clock in the evening, which is exactly the time to ascend. It's open. You've got 2 hours. It's nice and cool. The price is annoyingly the same, almost €20, but still worth doing. And the surprise in Athens for me, I found walking in the hills opposite the Acropolis, where you get effectively as much height as you would do on the Acropolis, so you've got a really different view on it. But then you can approach it and explore what turns out to be, in the skirts of the Acropolis, this Cycladic village put there by all the workers from the Cyclades who came over to help with the restoration work. Paul, is Athens on your list?
Absolutely is. I'm not a huge city fan, but Athens, and I totally agree. Except one thing: some people go there 8 o'clock in the morning. Half the day's gone. Anybody going to Athens from, I don't know, April through till October? No, I at sun up. It's cool. There's far fewer people there. And really, it hasn't. It sounds ridiculously cliched, but it hasn't changed. And to the biggest joy of certainly, if you want to look at it at sunset visually, it's wonderful. But to actually wander around there when there are very, very few people there indeed, and maybe even a little cold in the morning, it's remarkable. Yeah, I'm a big fan.
Good, but you're, as you say, you're not a great fan of cities, which is possibly why you are a fan of polar tourism, and you are going to conduct the masterclass this week. I've been to a fair number of polar locations, including the worst holiday I have ever had, which was involved a Canadian ship going from Greenland to the far north of
this
Canada.
is when you knew you were going to go and do a polar trip. And so you thought, I got a pal who's done this a lot for the last 15 years, has spent sort of several years of his life on these vessels. Shall I give him a call? Oh, I tell you what, I won't. I just won't. And look what happens. You reap what you sow.
Well, thank you.
So that was a disaster. And you are fairly tolerant of these things. But yes, that did sound dreadful.
This was aboard actually an old Polish ferry built in, I think, Stettin in the 1980s. Actually, a very, very well-run ship. And I was intrigued to learn about how the business model works. So these vessels are mostly rented out by an organisation based in Miami, and they are crewed by extraordinarily professional people. But then the travel company comes on and brings on the kind of cruise direction element.
I noticed you didn't use extraordinary professional when you're describing the last people. No, it does change, and they're not all the same. And if we're talking polar, it is the single most important decision you make is the ship. If you gauge your maritime holidays by the amount of sittings at dinner, shuffleboard, shopping, shows, and a lot of fawning by uniformed servants, really where you're going doesn't make that much difference, because you're not going to see much of it, and particularly in the Antarctic, because the Antarctic Treaty says 100 people ashore at any one time. So imagine if you and your family had spent the price of a decent car to come down here, and then they said, really sorry, Simon, you can't go ashore till 1 o'clock. And a storm's come through, but don't worry, there's going to be we're going to put the shop on 10% off. So that's worth it, isn't it? It's so important. And I've spent well over approaching 2 years of my life in the polar regions, north and south, and I have never been on a ship that's taken more than 100 people. Well, in fact, once, and everything was different. I was out on a rib on a Zodiac, and there was about, 24 humpbacks, icebergs the size of Westminster Abbey. It was as good as it gets, and we had to come back. Oh, no, I want to be out here. It's light until midnight. I want to be out here for 5 hours. Oh, no, we can't, because that's what the treaty says. I understood it, and nobody does that. And of course, the companies are notoriously coy about saying this. And there are more and more ships coming online, and none of them are 100 or less, because of course they play the numbers. And it's tough coming from here, the pound's weak, all of these things are costed in dollars. But yeah, you need to, if ever research was important, it is for this.
Okay,
something you palpably didn't do.
You mentioned you've been north and south, so Arctic, Antarctica, very, very different, almost complementary in the sense that Antarctica, of course, a huge continent around the South Pole, whereas in the north, the Arctic Ocean is a huge body of water around the North Pole, with a scattering of islands and mainland. So which would you recommend?
Well, they're different. And they're also, particularly for a European traveller, the Arctic is going to be less expensive. Of course it is. It's Northern European holiday. I've been to Spitsbergen, 15, 18 times. And seeing polar bears on sea ice is something very exciting to me. It really is. The mistake some people make is if they've been to Antarctica, they think Spitsbergen or the Canadian Arctic is going to be Antarctica with polar bears. It's not. It's not on the same scale. I mean, some of these icebergs, they're the size of counties. In fact, bigger than some counties.
And this would be in Antarctica.
Antarctica,
yes. But you also get some icebergs, of course, in the north, as poor old Titanic found out.
Yes, they did. You get good icebergs, but it's just not on the scale. Also, just in terms of numbers. Particularly if you include, and I strongly recommend South Georgia with Antarctica. Yeah, some of those landings, you've got 500,000 king penguins. Which is and elephant seals fighting and hanging glaciers, as well as the remarkable history, the sort of heroic exploration history, which there's nothing I hate worse than anywhere in the world that you go and after a few days you feel a bit guilty, I haven't done anything cultural, and then you go and look at some ruin or something, and think, well, what the hell did I do this? I'd far rather be on the beach or somewhere else in the bush. But yeah, if you're a bit cold out on the water down south, then I give you the James Caird or Ernest Henry Shackleton Worsley. These were real heroes, not like the Mummy's Boys heroes now we see on televisions with their GPSs and Gore-Tex and posh, foolish names. These are absolute heroes.
And is there much in the way of evidence of human settlements at these extreme latitudes?
In the Canadian Arctic, you have a good number of Inuit settlements. Down south, frankly, South Georgia has 4 people who live there, 2 work in the post office. And then you have 1 or 2 stations. There's Argentinian, Chilean, Spanish, English stations. Yeah, some people find them very interesting. I think there's more interesting things to do and see than to go to all the way there to sort of stand around a research station, frankly. I'd prefer to be, up close to, well, not too close, but to glaciers and icebergs and penguins and seals and the like. That interests me far more.
Oh, and what about Falklands in particular? Because clearly the big wildlife destination.
Yes, it is.
The one opportunity most of us would have to get there would be on board one of these ships.
Yeah, absolutely, because the only other way to discover the Falklands is you've got to get out to the islands, and it's expensive because you're taking small planes there. And I must say, I first time I went to Falklands, it was fascinating because I remember thinking it's an awfully long way to come to fight a war over a few sheep. But when I got down there and you come into Stanley and you look over up towards Tumbledown where the very grown-up fighting took place, you feel a little different. And, they take pounds there, they take dollars, they do not take pesos, and they do not take kindly to it. These are very patriotic people. It's fascinating. It's fascinating in terms of historically, but also wildlife. Yes, some of these islands have a remarkable penguin populations, a very dramatic scenery as well. So yeah, Falklands gets a big thumbs up as well.
Okay, well, we'll come back briefly to Antarctica in a moment. We've got to talk, though, about our destination of the week, which is Everest Base Camp. Because, Paul, you are off to Everest Base Camp. That's not, I understand, because you are going to climb Everest.
No, I think we've all seen that photograph of about, what was it, 300 people stacked up on the Hillary Step. That's just completely wrong. However, 2 sides of every coin. This is one of the poorest countries in the world, Nepal, all right, who suffered an abominable an harrowing earthquake 5 years ago. And so a lot of people have been very precious about it. Oh, no, this is awful. Hang on, people are paying 50, 60,000 to climb Everest. There's going to be casualties. There always is. But that was just, probably due to a number of meteorological situations, a load of people stacked up there. Everest Base Camp is one of the seminal treks you can do. Have you been to Nepal, Simon?
I'm embarrassed to say that I haven't. I've had a visit actually all set up for a few months after.
Did you have a drama getting to the airport?
No, I didn't actually, Paul, but thank you for asking. No, it's simply that between planning it and taking place, the earthquake happened, and it was simply not appropriate to go there.
No, I understand. The whole Everest region, the Langtang region, is what was suffered worst during the earthquake. I know it from the company I work for. We raised hundreds of thousands, and my God, they needed a load more. And tourism is absolutely essential to that country. When the Maoists were getting a bit tasty there, and there were travel bans, which really helped the Nepalis, as you can imagine. It was awful for them. But these are some of the gentlest, hardest working, toughest people. Anyway, and yeah, Everest Base Camp. I've been into the Annapurnas and I've never done that. So next year I'm going to do it. I have a big campaign raising money for Bengal tigers. You know about this. You've been involved with it, Simon, and I wear this big suit. So I thought to actually sign off and say
tiger
that.
Suit,
yes,
which you've done a number of marathons.
15 marathons, in it, and it's been up Kilimanjaro. And I want to do the Everest Marathon with it. So. Yeah, as my dear chum and wildlife specialist Chris Packham said, Everest and marathon there. Now, there are two words that should never come together without substantial punctuation in between. So, yeah, it's going to be a battle.
And talking of that, you cannot possibly run 26 miles at altitude, can you?
Well, first of all, I think we put run in parentheses. There are going to be areas I'm not going to run. It is downhill. It's from Kalapatar, so base camp, down to Namche Bazaar, the sort of almost fabled capital of that area. And there are some areas I will jog. I think plod is probably a better word. There are probably some where there's uphill stretches. I will walk. I think they say if you take your best marathon time and double it, maybe add half an hour, you're fairly close. So I'm glad it starts at 6 a.m.
Right.
But yeah, I'm looking to raise hundreds of thousands for some school projects down in India. So yeah, it'll be lovely to be back in India.
And is it, if you are not doing noble things and you're not going there with a tiger outfit and you're not running a marathon, is it still a worthwhile destination for people? Because of course for all the climbers, it is simply the start of their journey, but for a lot of trekkers, it's the end. And is it a worthwhile end, or is it a bit sort of shabby?
Totally, it really is. First time I went to Nepal, I wondered why I'd gone trekking anywhere else in the world. Because it's just the breadth of extraordinarily blue chip treks you can do across the whole area. People, they argue about which is the better area of the Annapurnas or the Everest region. It's not an argument. Some people sway towards one or the other. There's no wrong answer there. It is staggeringly beautiful, number one. Number two, it just does not shortchange. Just the scale. You wake up in the morning and before the sun hits you, an hour before or an hour and a half before, it touches 5 of the 8 highest peaks in the world. Also, they are pretty much uniformly the nicest people I've met just about anywhere. I've met plenty of nice people around the world.
And you work in Surbiton.
I work in Surbiton. I live in South London, so I know all about nice people. But also, critically, and this sounds pious, but not only is it a remarkable destination, it is challenging as well, but also your visit is actually doing an awful lot of good.
Is this Surbiton or Everest Base Camp? Look, let's talk about something also very serious, and this is what's happening in Russia, a country you've spent any time in?
Not much time in. No.
Okay. Well, very, very sadly, in the 1990s, it was somewhere where you were always reading about accidents involving aircraft, and I'm afraid just at the time when aviation worldwide is safer than it's ever been, leaving aside the terrible tragedies of the Boeing 737 MAX, of course, we are seeing yet more events involving Russia. Now, it's the world's biggest country. It's bound together by aviation. It has possibly the toughest locations for pilots, except possibly for for Nepal. But we have just seen a regional flight in eastern Siberia, flying from Ulan-Ude to Nizhneyagarsk in the Republic of Buryatia. Antonov 24 overshot the runway, 2 people killed, 7 people injured. That follows, in May, we had 41 people sadly dying. Aeroflot aircraft crash landed shortly after takeoff at Sheremetyevo Airport. You may have seen the footage which shows the plane bouncing along the runway before bursting into flames, and I'm afraid the list goes on. While the International Civil Aviation Organization shows that the regulation of airlines is better than it was, it's still below the global average for a lot of facets. February 2018, an Antonov aircraft, 65 people died in that. And then, of course, and this is nothing to do with safety measures, it is blamed on a bomb, the worst ever crash involving a Russian airline, 31st of October 2015 in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, when 217 passengers, 7 crew were killed. So aviation and Russia continues to be sometimes a fatal combination. Having said that, I would very happily go and fly around in Russia. Certainly for long distances, flying is far safer than the roads. Just before we go, bargain of the week. I have a theory, Paul. You've been talking about polar tourism.
Yeah.
I have a theory, and tell me if this is borne out. You know how the business works. If I go to Ushuaia at the southern tip of Argentina, or perhaps Punta Arenas in Chile, if I just go there and I let it be known that I'm there, and I sort of say, look, I'd like to go on a trip to Antarctica, if you've got any no-shows, am I going to be able to squeeze the price of these incredibly expensive trips down?
Right. Well, first of all, Ushuaia would be much better than Punta Arenas. There many more ships leave from Ushuaia. It is changing a bit because the cartel on the dock there is something. I mean, it is real mafiosa stuff there. It's just an easier place to get to than Punta Arenas. You really fly from Santiago. That's about it. So Ushuaia, yeah, easy. There's 5 or 6 flights a day from Buenos Aires. Yeah, you can do that. You're going to need some time. It won't be no-shows that gets you a deal. If they genuinely have no-shows, that might be what they say. Oh, yeah, we've just had a cancellation. Nonsense. They've got cabins to fill. And I think if you were to do that, I mean, this goes against everything. I say still the same tenets are applicable, do your research first on the ships, because if you find yourself on a 400 berth ship, don't expect to see too much of Antarctica because you only get off it once, but you'll have very good shopping and all that money you've saved from getting a rather weasel-like bargain from sort of loitering around in Ushuaia, you will waste. However, yeah, definitely. It's worth a look. You do your research. You find a ship, particularly out of season. You go down there.
Out of
Christmas,
season.
Well, no, you've got high, low, and shoulder. Now, the high season I don't know why, because this is the most capricious weather in the world. And if you get seasick, you got a chance you're going to get nailed there, because the Drake Passage is very rough. I've never heard anyone say it wasn't worth it because of that, but yeah, it can be. And the older the ship, and often the bigger the ship, the worse it is. Ask about stabilizers. Ask about stuff like that if you suffer. But the early season is sort of November through till about, I don't know, shoulder season kicks in at the end of November, and then then Christmas time, January, early February is the absolute height. And later on, when the ice is going a bit, the snow's going a bit, some of the penguins are swimming off, yeah, it drops back down into low season in March. Very good for whales then. But if you go sort of Christmas, January, February, you might be waiting around for a ship with a few cabins. But yeah, I'd be lying. If you were running a ship company and you had a few cabins spare, and would you prefer them to go empty, or somebody spend $5,000 instead of 10? Of course, and maybe better than that even.
Fantastic. That's all for now, but we'll be back soon to help you plan your escape, whether it's to the ends of the earth or to the ends of the line down to Surbiton. In the next podcast, free travel forever. That's the promise that's coming up from Luxembourg. But for now, from me, Simon Calder, and Paul Goldstein, goodbye.
Goodbye.